Good morning, all. Welcome to this WCA webinar. I'm Michelle Thompson, Communications Consultant with the Wisconsin Counties Association. Our topic today is Counties and Congressionally Directed Spending, how to engage in fiscal year 25. So we thank you so much for your time today. Our speakers are going to include Kyle Christensen. Good morning, Kyle. Partner with Wimmer and Company, and Dan Barr, WCA Government Affairs Associate, and our federal lobbyist who handles a lot of these issues. As always, please leave your questions in the chat or in the Q&A, and we will get to those throughout the webinar today. This is being recorded, and it will be housed on the WCA website at wicounties.org, and it's directly on the homepage under WCA webinars. So we're hoping this will be a resource for people going forward, as we know there have been a lot of questions coming into the association. So with that, Mr. Christensen, I'm going to hand it over to you to kick off our webinar.
All right, thank you, Michelle, and thank you everyone for joining us today. As hopefully all of you know, over the last couple of years, the association has really prioritized our advocacy, not only in Madison, but also at the federal level. Given the number of major initiatives that have happened in Washington, D.C., whether it be the ARPA funds, the CARES Act funds, the COVID relief funds, there's been significant activity at the federal level that has directly resulted in money not only flowing to the state of Wisconsin, but also to counties. So one of the things that we've done and prioritized is really increased our presence out in Washington, D.C., and as Michelle mentioned, our very own Dan Barr has kind of taken the lead on that. But in addition to a number of the large federal initiatives that have resulted in tens of millions of dollars for Wisconsin counties, the other kind of relatively new dynamic in Washington, D.C. has been the return of what I think most of us would refer to as the earmark process, right? Where you have members of Congress who specifically insert in legislation funding for projects within their state or in their district. When the earmarks returned after a prolonged absence in Washington, D.C., we wanted to make sure that counties, especially Wisconsin counties, had a seat at that table. So Dan has been working with a number of counties across the state on submitting earmarks. We've been very successful in getting a number of those earmarks pushed forward, with special thanks to Senator Tammy Baldwin and our congressional delegation on that front. But each time we talk about earmarks, the association gets a number of questions from members. And what we thought we'd do today is just have a 30-minute kind of Q&A where we cover a number of questions that we've heard, and Dan will answer those. So this will not be the last time we talk about the federal earmark process, but this is an opportunity for you to not only hear directly from our federal expert, Dan Barr, but also to ask any questions that you may have. So Dan, good morning.
Morning, Kyle. How are you?
I am well. So let's start off, Dan. I know that the correct term is congressionally directed spending, fancy term for earmark. So I think the first question that I think a lot of folks have is, when does the next congressionally directed spending or earmark process kick off?
So sure. So a very good question. It does kick off in the spring. So funding for example, we're currently working on earmarks that will be funded in 2024, but the money that will be funded in will be released in 2024 is actually appropriated in 2023. So we started in the spring. There's a submission process for the different projects or the earmarks or congressionally directed spending. And then essentially, we have to try to get those into the federal budget. As you know, right now, if you watch the news, the budget's being considered right now. And so those projects, we're trying to get them into the budget once you submit them with your member of the House of Representatives. Also, we try to work with Senator Tammy Baldwin. She's very good on the congressionally directed spending issue. And then we want to get them into the budget. And then, of course, we're going to need a budget. We need them to pass it. We have several that are in the process right now. We worked on those. We started those in the spring of 2023. And several of them have already gotten in. And then they will be funded in 2024. And so we're about to restart that process, looking ahead to 2025. There will be deadlines. Deadlines do vary from various members of Congress. Senator Baldwin, for example, will have a deadline, let's say hypothetically, she's got a deadline that's in March, and then perhaps your member of the House of Representatives, he'll have a deadline, say it's at another time. And so we have to be aware of those various deadlines. We are aware of them, and we are here to help to ensure that you make those deadlines if you want to make a submission.
And Dan, that's a great point that I think we need to reiterate is that when a county, submits an earmark to us or wants to work on something, we work with, of course, Senator Baldwin, who represents, all 72 counties, but then we also work with your member of the House of Representatives. So as Dan mentioned, each member has different timelines. So if you're, represented by, Congressman Fitzgerald, his submission deadline is going to be different than, Congressman Tiffany. So that's why it's so important to be proactive on this, and why it's important to contact Dan sooner than later. So we can kind of work backwards depending on what congressional district you're in, to ensure that we meet those deadlines.
That's right. And I just mentioned, so right now we're finalizing the earmarks that will be funded in 2024. This spring we'll work on 2025, but obviously that process to get the money in 2025 will occur in 2024. And then deadlines are typically in the spring. I'd say typically in February, maybe as late February, March, maybe as late as April, but we just want to be aware of those deadlines, and I'll certainly work with any of our members to ensure that they have a successful submission of their projects.
All right, next question, Dan. I think this account or funding source may be a good fit for my project. What's next?
Well, that's important. So what we try to do, you can submit your projects, but then in order to get them funded, we have to have an appropriate funding source. So for instance, just like in the state government, they fund DNR, they fund transportation. Federal government does the same. They have different accounts that match with various topics. And so when you have an earmark, we need to find the appropriate account. So if you have a transportation project, the Congress is not going to fund it out of a DNR account. We have to find the appropriate account, and it has to match. And then these different accounts, different departments within the federal government have different guidelines related to funding for an earmark. So, and of course, the Senate and the House have similar but different rules as well. And then they sort of match up the projects that are in the budget. They match them up, and that's sort of how the process works. It's kind of complex, but essentially we do need to find the appropriate account, the appropriate funding source for any given project. And we do work with, whether it's Senator Baldwin's office or the House member. We've been working with Brian Stile on the Racine Breakwater project, and also with NACO, the National Association of Counties. We work with them to identify the appropriate funding source, and we make suggestions to members of Congress on what may or may not work. Ultimately, they work with federal staff to ensure that it is an appropriate account. But yeah, if you have suggestions on an account that might work, we will run that by our members of Congress. We'll run it by NACO, and they will be able to determine, going through the process, whether it is appropriate funding source.
Dan, a couple of questions that we've gotten. Is there any limit to how many earmarks we can ask for? No. As
a matter of fact, it never hurts to bring a request forward. I would say that if anything you have, the worst that could happen is for them to say no. And so bring it forward, come speak with me, give me a call, send me an email, and we will work with our members to, try to bring those forward the best we can, and find appropriate funding sources. And sometimes you have to apply more than once. For instance, the Monroe County landfill expansion, the full cell expansion, we did not get that funded. It's in the process right now. It's in the pipeline. But this is the second time we've gone through the process. The first time we just didn't get it. And so, we want to be proactive. We want to be aggressive, but don't give up. You kind of stay on the members of Congress and their staff. The staff has been great. I mentioned Megan Ladwig from Senator Baldwin's office has been phenomenal. But what I would say is we want to make these issues salient. And the more we bring them back to these members of Congress, the more I go there and say, hey, I'm here to talk about the Racine Breakwater again. Hey, I'm here to talk about the Monroe County full cell expansion. The more I do that, I kind of think there's sort of an attitude within Congress like, geez, let's just do this and get it off our plate, and this guy will quit harping on it. So we've kind of been successful making these issues salient and sort of continue pushing on with a lot of the different projects that are out there. So it's worked out pretty well so far.
Dan, we do have a question, if we just can interject into that right now. So the question is, we have a project on that current list. When that is all signed, et cetera, what is next for actually receiving the funding? Do the feds cut us a check up front? Is it a reimbursement?
Yeah, the feds will send you the money. I mean, it's a very good question. The feds will just simply send you money for a specific project. Earmarks are earmarks; they're not reimbursements, so you'll get the money up front.
Dan, next question. Can I request funding for bricks and mortar projects? So I think, the question is, do these have to be specific, building projects? Can they be, anything? What are kind of the restrictions on what we can ask for?
Well, you can definitely do that. As we talked about the morgue that we have, Kyle. But you want to, again, we have to find the correct account. So I'd say building projects are typically funded through the Economic Development Initiative under HUD. And facilities and construction under the Health Resources and Service Administration, HRSA, and Rural Development Community Facility grants from the Department of Agriculture. That's typically where bricks and mortar projects can be funded from. But again, we have to find the appropriate funding source. I can't emphasize that enough.
And when we talk about the appropriate funding source, Dan, we're not asking individual counties to come to us and pick the right funding source. A lot of times we work in partnership with our delegation to identify, where the funds can come from. Is that right?
That's right. Absolutely true. Yeah, and we also work with NACO. NACO does have some good information about the appropriate funding sources.
Next question. Do all accounts have matching requirements? Is there a match required at the local or federal level?
No, not necessarily. Your member of Congress may want a match. For instance, on the morgue that I talked about with Senator Baldwin, there was a matching requirement. The county is paying half, and the federal government is paying the other half, and so that was very positive. But a lot of times, members of Congress will want a local buy-in. Again, it depends on the account you're getting the money from. They may have matching requirements, but not necessarily. And again, a lot of times you may have a fiscally conservative member of Congress who will say, well, there needs to be some local buy-in. And so they will expect that there is some matching required or involved.
And I think you just answered this question, Dan, but we have a question in the chat. It says, we have a $20 million project. We'd take any amount to help offset the cost. Is that possible? And, like you just said, yes, it is, right? And I think anytime that there's, that you can show there's local buy-in, right? There's local support going to this project. That always helps, right? Rather than asking for, a project to be 100% funded, if there's some local investment, local or state, that always kind of gives us a leg up. Is that right, Dan?
Yeah. So I think first off, in my view, any amount of money we can get out of Washington, D.C., if it's a partial match, if it's just $2 million, for a $10 million project, whatever it might be, I view that as a win. Our goal is simply to maximize the amount of money we can get to Wisconsin from Washington, D.C. We're trying to maximize that amount. And so we'll take what we can get. That's what I always say. Please help. When I talk to members of Congress, when I talk to their staff, please help us out. Whatever you can do, we'd be highly grateful for. And so that's the first thing. Second thing, on examples of community engagement. We do want stakeholders, community leaders, the business community, whoever it might be, to speak in favorably on the project. And no amount of support is ever enough. The most you can get, or anyone you can get to support a project, that's a positive thing. We want to encourage people to, enact all their community stakeholders to send a letter or to contact their member of Congress in support of a project that we are advocating for. I think more is always better when it comes to community engagement and community support. Sometimes people will ask me, well, if I have the Chamber of Congress weigh in, would that help? Well, of course it would help. I mean, it can't hurt. So we want to get as much engagement. We want as much support for our projects as possible, for sure.
The other thing, Dan, that I know that you've encouraged, our members to do is, if you want to build support for a project, we highly encourage you to invite your, United States senators or your congressional members, into the district to see the project. Invite them to a ribbon cutting, whatever it may be. Having them on the ground and seeing things, really, in person with their own eyes is always, that always kind of makes it a little bit more real. Is that right, Dan?
Yeah, I think it's right. If you can demonstrate a need, and again, these are competitive. Our projects compete with projects from other states. Members of Congress don't always get what they want. Members of Congress are finicky. Sometimes they won't support a project. Some members of Congress don't believe in our earmarks. We have members of our congressional delegation that they just don't do that. They're concerned about the level of debt and too much government spending. So if you can make a case, if you can get them there in person and see, the issue for themselves, I certainly think that helps.
So, Dan, how much funding should a county request?
Well, it's going to vary, and there may be limitations based on the funding source, how much you can request. But, I always say, go for the jugular, request what you can. I think you should be realistic about how much, you're going to get. And again, it's a competitive process, but, I would not request an unrealistic amount. It's got to be, we got to be able to sell this stuff, but I would tend to go on the high side. However much the project is, request the whole thing, and this is how much it costs, Senator Baldwin or member of Congress. That's what I would say, and then maybe they might say, well, we only have so much available from this account that this project matches with. But I do think that we don't want to over request. We don't want to request more than a project cost. We look kind of silly doing that. But we want to be realistic also about how much money we can actually get.
So, Dan, before we get to the next question, we've referenced a couple of different things we've been working on, whether it be the landfill expansion in Monroe County, or the breakwater project in Racine, or the morgue in Marathon County. But can you just kind of highlight, some of the projects, in addition to those three that we've been working on, to give people a general idea of what some counties have submitted?
Yeah, so for instance, Eau Claire County has a county trunk highway that they had, they had requested $20 million for one of their county trunk highways just to be repaired, resurfaced, rebuilt. Now they only got $5 million of the $20 million they requested, but the project was a $20 million project. That was John Johnson in Eau Claire. We've had a police communications center that was Burnett County. We've had right now there's a child care center that Dodge County is looking at doing for 2025. Sort of a hybrid child care center and affordable housing facility in Dodge County. We're working with Dave Froling on that. And so these things vary. There's different requests that people talk to me about all the time. And another example would be the airport in Sheboygan County. They're looking at replacing and installing their own fixed base operator for the running of their airport. It's the people that secure the tarmac, provide the fuel for the planes, and also provide the amenities and the refreshments and food that's sold at the airport, things like that. That's what a fixed base operator does. But there's some bricks and mortar construction, there's some different costs involved, and so they are seeking an earmark in Sheboygan County for that. So it varies. It could almost be anything, and no question or no request is a dumb question or a dumb request. Just bring it forward, and I'll let you know what the appropriate venue is to introduce that project, and we can talk with our members of Congress about it and Senator Baldwin. And it never hurts to ask. Again, if you don't ask, you're not going to get anything. And so it never hurts to push it forward. And I encourage our members to do that.
Yeah, I think we've talked about this, but if my project is funded, will I receive the full amount I requested?
Hopefully, it depends. And again, on the availability of funding, the competitiveness of the project. If it's something that the members of Congress view is something that's very important and critical, and you've made a great case for it, it's possible you may get that. But again, and I cannot say this enough, even if partial funding is offered, we do view that as a win. We want to, our goal is to maximize the amount of money we're getting out of DC. I think, Kyle, Wisconsin, for each dollar that we send to Washington, DC, we only get like 94 cents back. And that means that other states, they're getting, for every dollar they send, maybe $1.05 back. So we want to increase the amount of money we're bringing to Wisconsin. We want to maximize the number of dollars we have here in Wisconsin that come out of DC, because our taxpayers pay those dollars. We want to bring them back home. And so that's our goal. And again, no project is a dumb project. No question's a dumb question. Just bring it forward. It never hurts to ask. And I just can't emphasize that enough. I think sometimes people, they kind of hold back and like, maybe I shouldn't do this. No, bring it forward. Definitely bring it forward, and contact me anytime. And I will work with NACO. I'll work with your House member, your member, your congressional delegation. We have 8 members of Congress. I'll work with your House member. And again, Senator Baldwin is our earmark champion. Senator Johnson doesn't, he's concerned about federal spending. He doesn't really do earmarks, I would say. He will support funding for already appropriated dollars to different projects. But when it comes to earmarks and congressionally directed spending, Senator Baldwin is our person. And even if you're in a House district where your House member is not interested in doing congressionally directed spending, we can still work through Senator Baldwin. She represents the entire state. And so keep that in mind too. And I'm aware of the positions that different members of Congress have on congressionally directed spending. So I can ensure that, whether you have a House member who is supportive of that or not, that we can work through the appropriate venues and potentially get something done.
A couple of questions in the chat, Dan. Given that the CDSs are due in spring, when is the appropriate time to bring ideas to our members?
There's never, I'd say bring them forward immediately. And if you do have a project that you'd like to submit in the spring, to be considered in 2024, to be funded in 2025, contact me now and I can assist you with that process. We'll want to identify what House district you're in, and we'll want to also chat with Senator Baldwin, but bring it to me now. And again, I'll work with the members. In a lot of cases, I've drafted issue papers, white papers, and put our logo on it and the county's logo on it. I can assist with all those things. I can help you with the logistics. I can help you with the deadlines. You want to make sure you submit your project on time. If you're past the deadline, it's bad. We want to try and get it on time. That's the most important thing. So bring it forward to me now. And again, I'll be heading out to Washington, D.C. next month, and then again for NACO Ledge. And so, we're going to make these projects salient. I already have a series of them that I'm looking at doing, again, competing to try to get it in the budget for 2024 to be funded in 2025.
A couple more questions in the chat, Dan. Do minority members get earmarks just like members of the majority do? Absolutely.
It's a great thing about the system is the Democrats and Republicans have agreed to submit the amount of funds that they use for congressionally directed spending. They split it in half. And so it doesn't matter who's in the minority or the majority. In the Senate, it's a 50-50 split. They split it in half. And so that's just the way it goes. And so any senator, rather than the majority or the minority, can be very effective in terms of congressionally directed spending. When you think about future elections, I know in 2024, the Democrats currently have the Senate majority. It's been pointed out to me, well, Democrats have a difficult map. There's a potential the majority could flip. And does that matter? I'd say Senator Baldwin, she's still going to have access to half the money or be able to compete for half the money because the party's split in half. So it doesn't matter if they're in the majority or a minority. They still can be very active in the congressionally directed spending process.
Dan, if a county submits an earmark to you, is it a requirement that they go, themselves to Washington, D.C. to meet with the member, or, can they talk with them in the district? Do you do that? How does that work?
Great question. So, there's no requirement that they travel to Washington, D.C. I would, of course, encourage people to attend the National Association of Counties Legislative Conference, but you don't have to do that. And we can set up meetings via Zoom. You can do it from your home county. We will communicate with the member of Congress. I go to D.C. and I bring the projects forward, and we've been successful on projects. For instance, the Monroe County project that we referenced, the full cell expansion. I basically did that. We had communication with Senator Baldwin and Representative Derek Van Orden, but I wouldn't say that Monroe County spent its time traveling to Washington, D.C. I do that. I do that for all our members. So it doesn't hurt to be in Washington, D.C. and to visit their congressional offices there, but it's not certainly not a requirement. And we can certainly, if you're not able to do that, we can certainly accommodate you irregardless.
Dan, how do members choose which individual projects they're going to submit as earmarks?
Well, basically, Kyle, it's pretty objective. It's the projects they like. It's based on their priorities, and we have to make the sale to the members of Congress. And I think it's so important with the projects that we're bringing to Washington, D.C. from Wisconsin. And I always use the term, we want to make them salient. We really want them to know that we want them. It's important to our members. We want to make it their priority because they get to decide. And obviously, it's a competitive process. Also, I would say we might bring a project forward that a member of Congress likes, but it's not eligible for an account, or we can't find an account for it. So sometimes there's some hurdles that we have to try to overcome. But ultimately, it's at their discretion, and we have to make the case. And so I do try to make the projects that we have from Wisconsin salient to our members, and I try to keep bugging them so that they do push them forward. But ultimately, it's up to the members.
And a question in the chat: are there projects that just don't stand a chance?
Well, I guess you could say that. We might see a project and we both might think it's silly, and the members of Congress might think it's not worth funding. So, but even if that's the case, if you feel you have a project that is important to your county, you should still bring it forward. The worst thing that could happen is for a member of Congress to say no. You lose nothing by bringing it forward, and we have to try. We have to try our best. But the federal government, as people know, they fund lots of things that you might not expect them to fund. So, just again, I can't emphasize enough, bring the project forward, let me know what you have going. And, we will put feelers out there and talk with your House member and talk with Senator Baldwin and sort of get feedback on what they think, with the staff, and see what we can get done. Of course, we will always try to accommodate any project that comes forward, but there are maybe some that might not make it, but I still would try to bring anything forward that a county was interested in having funded.
So it would never be WCA saying, no to a county, we're not going to, advance this, right? I mean,
I would never say no. We don't say no. We work for the members. I work for the members. We work for you. So we're here for you to try to bring your project forward. So you may think in your mind, well, this will never get funded. This seems silly. And don't have that attitude. Bring it forward, and we will assist you however we can.
All right, last question, Dan. If a member of the Wisconsin Congressional Delegation submits my request, will it be approved? When will I know?
Well, it certainly increases the odds a lot. We need them to submit your request, and they go to various committees that are related to the various funding sources that are out there. And then we try to get it in the budget, obviously. And so it certainly increases the odds. And typically then, once members of Congress submit those funding requests, those projects, they do press releases or they contact myself, and then I share that with our members. So for instance, Hillview Nursing Home in La Crosse is they're sort of renovating it. We found out, it wasn't even in Senator Baldwin's press release that she issued when she put in her requests for Congressional Directed Spending, but we did find out that they did get some support for that project. And I had thought they had been denied, but they got it. So that was great. It's just a great thing. So, we're happy about that, and we will let you know, they will let us know, and members of Congress usually communicate the congressionally directed spending that they're trying to champion because they want to get credit for the work they do for the state.
Great.
There's one more question I think it's important, just relates to that deadline, Kyle.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Yeah, and I know we had an issue last year on this, but what happens if I miss a member of Congress's submission deadline, Dan?
Here's my answer to that. Don't miss it. Be in touch with me. The deadlines are different. So for instance, let's say you're in the 1st Congressional District. That's Representative Brian Stile. He will have his individual deadline. Okay. And then Senator Baldwin, she's going to have her individual deadline on the Senate side. We want to submit the projects to both your House member and the Senate, Senator Baldwin. We want to submit to both. She will work with Republican members of Congress. I know she's a Democrat. They'll work together to try to try and do something for you, and should they like the project. So we just want to make sure we keep an eye on the deadlines. I know when the deadlines are, I contact those offices and be like, hey, you're doing CDS. When is your deadline? And so, what I would say is just be in touch with me. I'll let you know ahead of time when the deadline is. And I oftentimes will call counties. I remember calling Monroe County about their full cell expansion, saying, hey, just so you know, deadline for Congressman Van Orton is today. Deadline for Senator Baldwin is next week, Wednesday, hypothetically. And so we want to keep up with those deadlines, because if you miss the deadlines, a competitive process, it significantly increases the chances that you're not going to get funded in this cycle. And so just important that people keep up with that. But again, typically the deadlines are in March, maybe as late as April. And then in the fall, they do the budget for the following year. So we try to get those projects into that budget, and then you get the funding the following year.
Right, Dan, it looks like we have one more question for you. What does my request have to look like? Is there a form? Do I need an issue paper? what does a county have to, submit to us, or what do we have to submit to the
Sure.
member of Congress?
So each member of Congress, typically they have a form you fill out that includes the deadline date of when it's due. And then, you do want to submit supplemental material that the county has. A lot of counties, maybe they've had a consultant work with them, or had one of the department heads work on a packet of information about a particular project. And also, as I've said, WCA, and what we've done is we have our own white papers that I take to Washington, D.C. with me. What I try to do with my white papers is try to simplify, big picture, look at this project, what does it do, who, what, where, and why, with my white paper. But, we think that we put our logo on it, and we feel that gives any particular project from our members credibility when we have our logo and we have our own white paper supporting the county's particular project that I do in partnership with counties that submit congressionally directed spending requests.
So Dan, those forms, are those something that, we can get a hold of and put on our website, or how do members get the form, or do they just call you?
Well, yeah, those that do congressionally directed spending, they usually produce a form. And then, I always check in with them, and they share the form with me. Every year they have a new form, but it's relatively similar. We could put it on our website. We haven't done that in the past, but just typically we've sent it out via constant contact when a particular office has a form and a deadline. We share that with the members, and that's basically how it's handled.
I see, Dan, we have a comment in the chat that says also each member has different submission requirements. Some have an online portal, while others may just request an email submission. So I know that's something that you're on top of, working directly with these members. So Michelle,
it's all different. It's all different. It's important to keep that in mind, that it's not a uniform process. Brian Stiles' process is different from Tammy Baldwin's process. Scott Fitzgerald's process is different from Glenn Grothman's. So keep that in mind. But I am up to date on what those processes are, or what the deadlines are, what the forms are. And so if I know, you can name a county, I can tell you which congressional district it's in, and then we'll try to ensure that we work with the House member and also with Senator Baldwin, that they get their project submitted on time, in the appropriate form, with the appropriate venue. We work with our members on that, and we can identify those processes as we go forward.
All right, Michelle, I see that we are 2 minutes over time. Did we miss anything in the Q&A or the chat?
No, we did not, Kyle. I'm impressed. We only went 2 minutes over. Want to thank everybody for their time today. Thank you, Dan Barr. Thank you, Kyle Christensen. And as always, thank you, Anne Marie Austin, who is behind the scenes making all of these things go so smoothly. This webinar recording will be posted on wicounties.org. Just look for WCA webinars on the homepage. We will also place an updated slide deck that you're looking at on that page as well, directly next to it. And as always, we encourage you to attend our Monday morning leadership meetings, where we give regular updates on congressionally directed spending and all the other legislative issues we have facing Wisconsin counties. Our 11 a.m. this coming Monday, we are featuring Secretary of State Sarah Godlewski. So just making a little push for that, and we hope to see you then. But as always, we thank you for your time and your commitment to Wisconsin counties. Have a great day, everybody.